When I think back to that summer, it still amazes me how calm I stayed through all of it. My name's Nolan, I'm 32, and I've always been the one who plans everything, who keeps track of dates, who makes sure everyone gets home safe. My parents used to call me the glue. I thought that was a compliment until I realized glue just holds broken things together. Anyway, this all started with what I thought was going to be the happiest trip of our lives. My parents had always dreamed of going to Europe, specifically Paris, Rome, and a small village in southern France where my mom's grandparents were from. They used to talk about it like some mythical dream they'd never afford. When I finally started earning enough at my software job, I decided I'd make that dream come true. I wasn't married, no kids, no huge expenses, and I wanted to do something meaningful for once. So I told them I wanted to take them on a 2-week trip. Flights, hotels, everything covered. Mom teared up instantly. Dad patted my shoulder, that proud but awkward kind of gesture he does when he doesn't know what to say. My sister, Erin, just crossed her arms and muttered, "Must be nice when you don't have student loans." She's 29, lives at home, works part-time at a boutique, and somehow manages to make every family event about how hard her life is. I brushed it off. I've been doing that for years. I figured this trip would finally bring us together. Maybe remind us that we were still a family underneath all the passive-aggressive tension. The plan was simple. I'd transfer my parents $9,000. That would cover everything. And they'd handle the bookings with my input. My mom loves planning, so I thought it would make her feel involved. I know, rookie mistake. But at the time, it felt like a kind gesture. The first red flag came 2 weeks after I sent the money. I asked if they'd gotten the flight confirmations, and Mom said, "Oh, the travel agent's still finalizing." Travel agent? I hadn't heard anything about a travel agent. I thought we'd just book online like normal people. But I let it go, figuring she just wanted some extra help. Then Erin started acting weird. She'd drop little comments like, "You know I've always wanted to see Paris," or, "I'm so jealous you guys are going without me." The "you guys" stuck out to me. Not you, not Mom and Dad, but you guys. Like she already felt included. I tried to laugh it off, but a pit formed in my stomach. A week before we were supposed to leave, I called my parents to check if they'd packed. My mom picked up and said she was just ironing clothes for the trip. I asked what time our flight was, and she paused. Not a short pause, but the kind that stretches so long it tells you everything before they even open their mouth. Finally, she said, "Nolan, honey, about that." My heart dropped. "About what?" She sighed. "You're going to be upset, but Erin's been going through a really tough time, and we thought." "Mom, what did you do?" Dad took the phone then, his tone suddenly stern, as if I were the one who'd done something wrong. "Watch your tone, son. Your sister's been struggling. We thought she deserved a break." I felt my pulse in my ears. Deserved a break with my money? She's family. Mom said quickly, like that excused everything. "You're doing fine, Nolan. You have your own apartment, your job, your health. She's just been through so much lately. She deserves this more than you do." I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wall. All I could think about was the last time they said something like that. When Erin crashed my old car at 19 and they said, "You can save up for another one." She can't. When she dropped out of college and they said, "You'll graduate." She needs support. When she borrowed money from me and they said, "She'll pay you back eventually." Spoiler, she never did. I'd always told myself they were just trying to protect her, that she was the fragile one, but in that moment I realized what I actually was: the safety net, the backup plan, the bank account with feelings. "Mom," I said quietly, "so you used the money I sent you for my ticket to buy hers?" A long silence. Then a small, guilty yes. I could almost hear her bracing for my explosion. But it didn't come. Something inside me just went still. I think that was the exact moment I stopped feeling like their son and started feeling like an outsider looking in. "Okay," I said finally. "Got it." Mom sounded relieved, like she thought I'd forgiven them. "Thank you for understanding, Nolan. We'll make it up to you." I just said, "Have a great trip." When I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't even yell. I just sat there, laptop open, staring at the folder where I'd saved all the booking info. Because, see, while I had let them handle the logistics, everything, from the hotel reservations to the flight confirmations, was under my name. My card. My account. I had the power to change things. And that thought settled in my mind like a quiet, dangerous spark. The next few days were strange. Mom and Dad acted like everything was normal, texting me packing updates and even asking for my suitcase recommendations. Erin posted a picture on Instagram of her new travel outfit with the caption, "Paris, here I come." Every time I saw it, that spark grew a little hotter. Part of me wanted to call and scream at them. Another part wanted to cancel everything and let them deal with the mess. But the biggest part, the one that had spent decades being told to be the bigger person, decided to play it differently this time. So I smiled. I texted Mom back, saying how excited I was for them. I even drove over to drop off some travel-sized toiletries. Erin barely looked up from her phone, mumbling, "Oh, so you're not mad?" I shrugged. "Why would I be?" She grinned. "Guess you're finally learning to chill." Yeah, chill. That night, I stayed up late at my desk, staring at the booking portal. The flight numbers, the hotel confirmations, the check-in codes. All of it right there, still editable. And as I scrolled, I noticed something else. They had never changed the emergency contact or main account email. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile forming. If they wanted to play this game, fine. I'd play it my way. But this time, I wouldn't be the one left behind wondering why. This time, they'd be the ones doing the wondering. And when they finally landed in Paris, they'd realize exactly what I'd done. Over the next few days, everything felt surreal, like I was living in two different realities. On the outside, I was calm, polite, and even supportive. I texted Mom every now and then asking how packing was going, dropped off some French guidebooks I had bought months ago, and even pretended to be excited for them. But on the inside, I was burning. Not with rage, that would have been too easy. It was more like quiet disappointment calcified into resolve. That kind of feeling you get when you realize the people who raised you don't actually see you. They just use you when it's convenient. The day before they left, I went over for dinner. It was supposed to be a simple family meal, but it felt like a staged production. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and Mom's fancy candles, the ones she only lit when guests came over. Erin was sitting at the table, showing Dad something on her phone. They both looked up when I came in. "Oh, look who decided to show up," Erin said with a grin that was too wide to be friendly. "Thought you'd still be sulking about the whole trip thing." I forced a smile. "Nope, I'm fine." Mom jumped in quickly, clearly relieved I wasn't making a scene. "See? I told you he'd understand," she said to Dad. "Nolan's always been mature about things." Dad gave a small nod, already carving the chicken. "It's just money, son. Family comes first." I sat down slowly, biting back the dozens of responses fighting to come out. Family comes first. What a joke. That phrase had been their shield for years, used every time they favored Erin. When they gave her my old laptop, because she needed it more. When they took her to Hawaii after she failed her classes. Or when they made me move out early so she could find herself in my old room rent-free. But tonight wasn't the night to argue. I just wanted to see how far they'd go. "So," I said casually, spooning some potatoes onto my plate, "you're flying out tomorrow, right?" "Tomorrow morning," Mom chirped. "We're so excited. I can't believe it's finally happening. Paris, Rome, and Nice. It's like a dream." Erin twirled her fork, pretending not to listen, then said, "We decided to skip the little countryside inn. Too boring. I found this influencer hotel near the Eiffel Tower. Infinity pool, rooftop bar, everything." "Oh, really?" I asked, feigning interest. "Didn't that cost extra?" She smirked. "Yeah, but Mom said since you booked everything, it's fine. You already covered it, right?" I looked at Mom. Her smile faltered just a little, but she nodded. "It wasn't much more. Just a few hundred." "A few hundred? From my money?" "Of course," I said quietly. "Anything for family." Erin raised her glass. "To family," she said dramatically. Dad clinked his glass with hers. Mom laughed. I just watched them, the sound of my fork scraping the plate a little louder than it needed to be. After dinner, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Nolan, I just want to say thank you again," she said softly, putting a hand on my arm. "You really made this possible. Erin's been in such a dark place lately. I think this trip might be just what she needs to get her spark back." I looked at her, trying to understand if she actually believed what she was saying. "And what about me, Mom? What do I get out of this?" Her expression softened, but not with empathy, with that condescending pity she always used when I asked for something reasonable. "You get to know you did something good," she said, smiling. "That's more valuable than any trip." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, "You're right. I'll remember that." The next morning, I got a text from Aaron. "Heading to the airport. Hope you're not too jealous. Winky face, lol." Then another from Mom. "Love you, Nolan. Promise we'll bring something back for you. Bring something back." Like a fridge magnet would fix everything. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and checked the bookings one last time. Every confirmation, every itinerary, every room reservation, all still under my account. I hadn't changed anything yet. Not yet. I wanted to be absolutely sure I was ready to pull the trigger when the time came. That evening, I went for a long walk through the park near my apartment. It was humid, the kind of sticky summer heat that clings to your skin. My thoughts kept circling around the same questions. Why her? Why always her? Why am I the one who has to understand? I realized I wasn't angry about the money. I could make more. What hurt was how easily they dismissed me, how natural it seemed for them to take without even asking. When I got home, I opened social media. There they were, photos of my parents smiling at the airport, Erin doing a peace sign pose with her boarding pass, Mom tagging me with a "thanks to our wonderful son for making this possible." The comments were full of praise. "You raised such a generous boy. That's real family love. What a dream son." And for a moment, I almost replied, almost told everyone the truth. But then I thought, no, not yet. Because if I'd learned anything from years of being overlooked, it was that timing mattered. Revenge wasn't about noise. It was about silence, waiting for the right moment, when they least expected it. A few days passed. They'd landed safely and started posting nonstop. Selfies in front of the Louvre, fancy pastries, champagne on a boat along the Seine. Aaron captioned one, "Manifesting the life I deserve." That one made me laugh out loud. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing with calls from friends who'd seen the posts. "Dude, your parents are in Paris? That's awesome. You really paid for all that? You're a saint." Yeah, a saint. Then came the moment that really sealed my decision. 3 days into their trip, I got a text from Mom. "Nolan, can you send another $300? We had to upgrade to a bigger suite because Aaron wasn't comfortable sharing the room." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Not comfortable sharing? On a free vacation she didn't even pay for? I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another message came through. "Please don't make a big deal out of it. You're doing well, honey. You'll make it back in no time." That line, "you'll make it back in no time," hit me harder than it should have. Like my work, my time, my boundaries meant nothing. Like I was just a machine they could press deposit on whenever they wanted. So I decided right then that when they landed back home, they'd finally understand what it felt like to be taken for granted. But the thing is, life doesn't always wait for perfect timing. Sometimes, it hands you the perfect opportunity without warning. A week later, Mom texted again, this time in all caps. "Urgent. Hotel is asking about payment issues." My heart skipped. I logged in to check the booking. The card I'd used was still active, but the hotel system had flagged the reservation because I'd updated the billing details the night before, something that, coincidentally, routed all communication through me. I hadn't canceled anything yet, but the moment had come closer than I expected. For now, I sent a calm reply, "Must be a glitch. I'll handle it." But as I typed that message, I couldn't help the smile tugging at my lips. Because if they thought the hotel glitch was stressful, they had no idea what was waiting for them next. Not when the booking details, confirmations, and even airport transport all ran through one account. Mine. And soon enough, they'd realize that treating me like a backup plan wasn't just unkind. It was a mistake. A very expensive one. I didn't sleep much the night after that billing issue. Not because I was nervous about what I'd done. If anything, I felt strangely clear-headed. It was like all the noise of years of being overlooked had suddenly quieted down into one steady hum of focus. But even as I stared at my laptop screen, watching the cursor blink beside the words, "Payment pending," I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. I wasn't the type to act impulsively. I wasn't going to cancel their reservations just to get a quick burst of satisfaction. I wanted something more meaningful, something that would make them feel the weight of what they'd done. The next morning, I got another message from Mom. "All good now. They said the payment went through. You're such a lifesaver, Nolan. Couldn't do this without you." That last line, "couldn't do this without you," hit differently. Not as gratitude, but as confirmation. They really couldn't do this without me. I had given them everything they had on this trip, and still, they saw me as the afterthought. I scrolled through their new photos. Aaron sipping espresso on a cobblestone street. Mom showing off her new scarf. Dad holding a baguette like it was the Eiffel Tower itself. The captions were what got me, though. Aaron posted, "Finally taking the trip of a lifetime with the two people who actually believe in me." The two people who actually believe in me. That was the moment something in me finally snapped. For years, I'd let comments like that slide. Every holiday, every family gathering, they'd make their little digs, and I'd smile through it, reminding myself, they're family, they don't mean it. But they did. Every word, every joke, every moment they reminded me that I was useful only when they needed something. It all added up. And now they were halfway across the world, enjoying a luxury vacation I paid for, while pretending like I didn't exist. That evening, I got a call from my aunt, Lisa, Mom's older sister. She's the only one in the family who ever really treated me fairly. "I saw your mom's posts," she said without greeting. "They're in Paris? You're not with them?" I hesitated. "No, they went with Aaron instead." Silence. Then, "With your money, I assume." "Yeah." She sighed. "I don't know how you stay so calm, Nolan. Your mom's been enabling your sister since she was born. I love her, but she's blind when it comes to Aaron." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Lisa understood. She always did. "Listen," she said finally, "don't let them make you feel guilty. They need to learn what it's like to lose your kindness. Trust me, it'll hit them harder than any lecture." That night, I poured myself a drink and stared at my screen again. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. I checked the itinerary one more time. Their next stop was Rome, check-in scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. And that's when I made my move. I didn't cancel the flight. I didn't touch their hotel yet. Instead, I changed one small, almost invisible detail: the names on the Rome reservation. I replaced Aaron Parker with Nolan Parker. It didn't matter that the booking was under the same email. Hotels rely on IDs to match names to reservations, which meant that when they showed up in Italy tomorrow, tired and smiling and ready to post another photo dump, they'd find out that their room was no longer theirs. I hit save, logged out, closed the laptop, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like a baby. The next day, around noon, my phone started vibrating on the counter. Mom's name flashed on the screen. Then again, then Dad, then Aaron. I ignored the first few, sipping my coffee slowly, watching the sunlight move across the floor. Finally, I answered. Mom's voice came out high-pitched and frantic. "Nolan, oh my goodness, we're at the hotel in Rome, and they're saying there's a problem. They said the name doesn't match the booking and they can't check us in." I pretended to sound confused. "That's strange. Did you bring the confirmation email?" "Yes, but they said it says your name now." "Why would it say that?" I paused for effect. "Well, Mom, that's because it was originally my trip, remember? My name was always on the booking." Dad's voice came in the background, sharp and irritated. "Tell him to fix it. Now." I could almost picture his red face, his jaw clenched like he was the victim in all this. "Dad," I said slowly, "you used my money without my permission. You took a vacation meant for me and made it yours. So maybe it's fitting that now, for once, my name is on something that belongs to me." "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "We're standing in the lobby, Nolan. People are staring. Just fix it before we have to find another place." Mom jumped in, her voice trembling between guilt and indignation. "Honey, please. This isn't the time for one of your moral lessons. We can talk when we're home, okay? Just help us out." There it was again. That tone. Like I was a child misbehaving instead of a grown man who'd been betrayed. "You know," I said quietly, "I used to think I was lucky to have parents who raised me to be kind. But now I realize kindness only works when it's mutual." "Nolan," Mom said, her voice shaking, "don't do this." "Don't what?" "Don't show you what it feels like to be left out? Because I'm pretty sure you already taught me how that feels." Before she could respond, I hung up. For a long time, I just sat there staring at my phone, feeling a mix of satisfaction and something heavier. Sadness, maybe. Revenge never feels as clean as people think. There's always that lingering ache underneath it, like an old wound reopening. But the ache was small compared to the quiet peace that came after. I knew they'd find another hotel. They had money, or at least credit cards. I wasn't trying to ruin them. I just wanted them to finally notice what they'd done, to realize how easily they took my generosity for granted. But Erin wasn't going to take that lightly. She never did. Later that night, my phone lit up again. Text after text from her. You're a psychopath. You ruined our trip. Mom's crying. You're jealous because they love me more. Hope you're happy. I didn't reply. Then came one final message. Don't bother coming to Thanksgiving. We're done. And that one made me laugh. Because the irony was perfect. They'd already been done with me for years. They just didn't realize it until now. But then, a few hours later, I got another call. This time from my aunt again. What did you do? She asked. But there was a hint of amusement in her tone. I told her. The whole story, from the stolen money to the hotel reservation switch. There was a pause. Then she started to laugh. The kind of laugh you only let out when someone finally does what you always wanted to do. Oh, Nolan, she said. You beautiful fool. You just gave them the only thing they understand, consequences. Her words lingered in my mind long after I hung up. I went to bed that night thinking it was over, that they'd finished their trip bitter and angry, maybe even stop talking to me for a while. But I underestimated just how far they'd go to protect their own narrative. Because 2 days later, when I checked my email, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A notification from my bank. Withdrawal of $2,000. Card ending in 7732. Location, Rome, Italy. That was my secondary card, the one linked to my travel account. The same card I'd used to pay for the original bookings. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I called the bank immediately and confirmed what I already suspected. Someone had used my saved card details from the original booking to withdraw cash overseas. I didn't have to guess who. I checked my phone, and sure enough, Aaron had posted another photo. New hotel. New outfits. Caption, lesson learned. Never rely on anyone but yourself. The gall. That was the moment, the real betrayal. Not the first theft of my money. Not the trip. But the fact that even after being caught, they doubled down. They stole again, confident I'd stay quiet because that's what I always did. And that's when I realized they hadn't just taken my money. They'd taken my silence for granted. That was the day I decided the trip wasn't over. At least, not for them. When I saw that withdrawal notification sitting in my inbox, I just stared at it. It didn't even look real at first. $2,000. Pulled straight from the account tied to my travel card. I hadn't used it since they'd left, and I definitely hadn't given anyone access to it. I must have sat there for a solid 5 minutes, numb. It wasn't the money that made my stomach twist. It was the principle. The confirmation that even after everything, after the confrontation in Rome, after the humiliation of being turned away at the hotel lobby, they'd still found a way to reach into my life and take more. It felt deliberate, like a message. You can't stop us. I called the bank and spent nearly an hour trying to explain that the transaction was unauthorized. The representative was polite but cautious, asking if the card might have been borrowed or if it was linked to any family accounts. I wanted to laugh. No, I said finally, not borrowed. Stolen. They froze the card immediately. I hung up and stared at my phone, waiting for it to light up with some kind of apology, some explanation. Nothing. Just silence. That silence hit harder than any argument could have. The next day, I got a text from my mom. Don't overreact. We needed cash for the hotel after you canceled things. We'll pay you back. No, sorry. No accountability. Just another thinly disguised command, wrapped in the language of family understanding. I didn't reply. I went for a walk instead. The kind where you're not really walking toward anything. You're just trying to escape your own thoughts. The city felt louder that day, like every car horn and chatter on the street was mocking me for being so naive. For years, I'd built my identity around being dependable. I'd been the reliable son, the one who picked up the pieces when things fell apart, the one who could afford to forgive. I always thought that made me strong. But standing there, watching people rush past me on the sidewalk, I realized it didn't make me strong. It made me easy to use. I went home, sat on the couch, and opened my laptop again. Their photos were still everywhere. Erin was posting constantly. Her in a designer dress by the Trevi fountain, another of Mom with a gelato, Dad holding a glass of wine. The comments poured in. Family goals. So happy for you guys. You all deserve this. And there I was, sitting alone in my one-bedroom apartment, a half-empty coffee mug beside me, staring at the people who had just stolen from me again. That's when it hit me how pathetic it all looked from the outside. They looked like a family that loved each other. I looked like the invisible man behind the camera, the one paying for the picture no one knew he took. The anger that had been simmering turned to something colder. Not rage, not even hatred. just exhaustion. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of every time I'd let something go for them. The car they promised to repay me for. The time I loaned Erin rent money because she was about to be homeless, only to see her at a beach resort a week later. The time Mom convinced me to temporarily add her to one of my credit cards because it'll help your credit history too. And every time, I told myself it was fine. I was being the better person. But being the better person doesn't matter when you're surrounded by people who don't care about being decent. 2 days later, they got home. I didn't hear from them. No calls, no texts, not even a "we're back safe." Then, a week later, I got a voicemail from my dad. His voice was sharp, annoyed, the way it always got when he was uncomfortable. "Nolan, we need to talk. Your mother's been upset about the way you handled things. You embarrassed us, and it was childish. We expect you to apologize to her and your sister. Call us back when you're ready to be reasonable." Reasonable. That word did it. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just stopped. Stopped answering. Stopped checking in. Stopped pretending that if I just said the right words, they'd finally see me. Weeks went by. My friends started to notice I was quieter, distracted. One of them, Marcus, asked me over beers, "You ever think maybe you keep giving them chances because you don't want to believe they'll never change?" That stuck with me, because deep down, that's exactly what it was. I kept waiting for some redemption arc that was never coming. Then one afternoon, I got an email from Erin. "Mom said you froze one of the cards. I had to pay the overdraft fee. You need to reimburse me. It's only fair since you caused it." I stared at it for a solid minute, then laughed. I couldn't even help it. It was so absurd, so beyond reason, that it didn't even make me angry anymore. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new document on my computer. At the top, I typed the list, and I started writing. Every single instance of manipulation, every favor that turned into an obligation, every dollar that never came back. The late-night calls, the guilt trips, the emotional blackmail. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about clarity. Seeing it all laid out like that, it was like stepping out of a fog. When I finished, I sat back and realized something simple but powerful. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I'd just been conditioned to believe that loyalty meant self-sacrifice. And now that I could finally see it clearly, I decided I was done bleeding for people who'd never even noticed the cuts. That's when the shift happened. The part of me that used to ache for their approval went quiet, replaced by something steady. I didn't know what my next move was yet, but I knew one thing. They weren't going to touch another cent of mine. So I started closing doors. I called the bank and removed my parents' names from anything they were linked to. I changed every password, set up new accounts, even switched my number. For the first time in my life, I was completely unreachable. Days passed. Weeks. The silence that once made me anxious now felt like peace. Until the letter came. It was handwritten, in Mom's cursive. "Nolan, we don't understand why you're doing this. You've always been the generous one, the glue that holds us together. Families fight, but this has gone too far. Your father, and I think it's time you grow up and realize that money doesn't make you better than anyone. We're your parents, and we deserve your respect. Love, Mom." I folded the letter and set it down on the counter. Respect. They demanded it, but they never gave it. And in that moment, standing in my quiet apartment, I realized this was it. My rock bottom wasn't about losing money or trust. It was realizing I'd spent 32 years trying to earn love that was always conditional. It was the first time I cried since this whole thing started. Not out of sadness, but out of release. Because I finally understood they weren't going to change. But I could. I didn't tell anyone what I planned next. Not even Marcus. I just knew it needed to be big, deliberate, poetic. Something that would make them stop and think, not out of vengeance, but out of shock. I started small, quietly. I reviewed every transaction, every booking record, every receipt tied to that $9,000. There was a trail, and that trail could be useful. I filed a fraud report for the $2,000 cash withdrawal. The bank confirmed they'd open an investigation. Then I started digging deeper, not into their finances, but into their comfort zones, the things they took for granted. Because if they wanted to teach me that family comes first, I was going to teach them what happens when the person who's always first to forgive stops forgiving. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about showing them who I became once I finally stopped being the glue. The funny thing about walking away is that at first it feels like failure, like you've lost something that should have mattered. But a few weeks after cutting them off, I realized that losing my family's approval wasn't really a loss at all. It was a weight lifted. The peace was strange at first. My phone didn't buzz every few days with guilt-laced requests. No one called to remind me that Erin was struggling again, or that Mom's credit card got declined and she just needed a little help. The silence, once unbearable, became comforting. It was mine. I started filling the space they left behind with things I hadn't done in years. I signed up for a photography class. I took early morning walks by the river instead of checking my emails half awake. I started cooking again, not out of necessity, but because I enjoyed it. I even began traveling, short trips at first, a weekend in Lisbon, a few days in Prague. Places I'd always wanted to see, but never prioritized because I was too busy working, saving, or paying for someone else's dreams. The first time I boarded a plane with my own ticket, I almost laughed. It felt poetic. The son who'd paid for everyone else's vacations finally taking one for himself. I posted one photo from Lisbon. Just one. A quiet street at sunset, no caption. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from Erin. Wow, must be nice. Using our family money for solo trips now? I didn't respond. I just blocked her number. It was that easy. Meanwhile, my life started to take shape again. Work picked up. I'd been with the same software firm for years, but I'd never really pushed for anything more because, subconsciously, I didn't believe I deserved more. That changed. I took on new projects, started leading a small team, and by the end of that quarter, my boss called me in for a meeting. He smiled when I sat down. You've been killing it lately, Nolan. We've noticed. You ever thought about heading up your own division? For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Me? The quiet guy in the corner, the one always saying yes to everyone else? The one who used to send half his paycheck to his parents every month out of habit? I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. Yeah, I think I have. By the end of that week, I had a new title and a salary increase that still makes me shake my head when I think about it. But more than the raise, it was the freedom that came with it, the sense that my time was finally mine again. Around that same time, I started dating someone new. Her name was Claire, a journalist I met at a mutual friend's dinner party. She had this calm, grounded energy that pulled me in immediately. Our first date was simple, coffee and a walk around the city. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I didn't feel drained or on guard. When I told her about my family, she didn't interrupt. She just listened. And when I finished, she said, "You didn't lose a family, Nolan. You lost a hierarchy that kept you small." That stuck with me. Over the next few months, things only got better. I bought my first home, a modest but beautiful townhouse near the park. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I wanted a place that was truly mine. I filled it with small things that made me happy. Framed photos from my trips, plants I actually remembered to water, a record player that hummed old jazz records late at night. Every time I unlocked the door after work, it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 32 years. Then one day, a letter arrived. Not handwritten this time. Typed. Neat, official looking. From my bank. The fraud investigation had concluded. The $2,000 withdrawal in Rome had been traced, complete with camera footage from the ATM. The report attached showed exactly what I already knew. My sister, withdrawing the cash with Mom standing right beside her. The bank confirmed they'd refunded the money to me and noted that, should I choose, I could pursue further legal action. For a moment, I just stared at the paper. Not in anger, not even satisfaction, just clarity. They'd always acted like I was too soft to stand up for myself, too forgiving to ever draw a line. But now, I had proof of what I'd known all along. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as funding. I didn't file charges, not yet, anyway. But I made a copy of everything. Every receipt, every message, every email. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Then, about 3 months later, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. It was my dad. "Son," he started, his voice unusually formal. "We'd like to talk. In person." I didn't say anything. "Your mother's been upset. We all have. We want to move past this. Erin's been struggling again, and..." There it was. The real reason. Not reconciliation. Not remorse. Another setup. I cut him off. "You know what, Dad? I'm glad you called. Because there's something you should know." He hesitated. "What's that?" "I'm done. Done. Yeah. Done fixing everything. Done paying for your mistakes. Done pretending we're something we're not. Whatever struggles Erin has, they're hers, not mine. He sighed. You've changed, Nolan. I had to. And I hung up. That night, Claire came over. I told her about the call, and she smiled in that gentle way of hers, setting down a bottle of wine. Change is uncomfortable, she said, especially for the people who benefited from your old self. I looked around my home, at the life I'd built piece by piece, and realized she was right. I wasn't the same person anymore. I'd grown into someone who didn't flinch when people disapproved of him, someone who didn't need validation to feel whole. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. That call from my dad, the way he'd phrased it, the tone, it wasn't just a plea. It was preparation. And I was right. 2 weeks later, I got an email from my parents' lawyer. Apparently, my grandfather's estate, the one they'd always said wasn't much, had finally settled after years of probate. It turned out it was much. A small fortune, actually. Enough to change lives. The lawyer wanted to confirm my attendance at the family meeting scheduled for next month. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. It was almost poetic. After everything, life had given me a seat at a table they once tried to push me away from. Claire looked over at me. What's wrong? I smiled slowly. Nothing. Actually, everything's finally right. Because for the first time, I wasn't going into that room as the forgotten son, the quiet provider, or the bank account they could guilt into obedience. I was going in as the man who'd rebuilt himself, one who didn't need their approval, or their inheritance, or their apologies to feel powerful. But they didn't know that yet. And when they saw what I'd done with my life, how far I'd come without them, I knew it would sting far worse than any revenge I could have planned back when I was angry. Still, part of me wondered what exactly they were planning. The timing, the sudden invitation, the lawyer involved, it didn't smell like reconciliation. It smelled like strategy. I closed the laptop and leaned back, the corners of my mouth curving into a quiet smile. They thought they still had control, that I was the same old Nolan, the one who'd fold the moment they said family. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. And soon, they'd see that for themselves. The letter from my parents' lawyer sat on my desk for a few days before I opened it again. The paper felt heavy, official, that thick kind of cardstock lawyers use when they want you to take something seriously. I reread every line carefully, half expecting it to vanish like some cruel joke. But it was real. My grandfather's estate, the same one my parents had always downplayed, had finally gone through probate. There was money involved. Real money. A house, land, and several investment accounts. Enough to make everyone sit up straighter when they heard the numbers. The meeting was scheduled for the following month at the attorney's office downtown. The email said all relevant family members were expected to attend. Relevant. That word lingered. A few years ago, I might have second-guessed my place in that category. But not anymore. I poured myself a coffee, sat back, and thought about how strange life had become. Less than a year ago, I was the quiet one, the peacemaker, the fixer, the person who never made a scene, the kind of man who'd rather take the hit than argue. And now here I was, staring down a meeting that could change everything, not because of the money, but because of what it represented: leverage. See, money had always been the currency of power in my family. My parents used it to control, to guilt, to remind me who I owed. And when I finally earned enough of my own, they found ways to take it under the guise of family fairness. But this time, the money wasn't theirs to twist. It was coming from my grandfather, a man who, ironically, had always told me to never let sentimentality cloud your judgment. He wasn't affectionate, but he was sharp, practical. When I was a kid, he'd let me sit in his workshop while he repaired old radios. He'd hand me a screwdriver and say, "Everything breaks eventually, Nolan. The trick is knowing what's worth fixing." At the time, I thought he meant machines. Now I knew better. I decided to do a little research before the meeting. I wasn't about to walk into another family ambush blind. A week later, I called the attorney's office, not the main number, but the one listed on the letterhead. A woman named Sandra answered, her tone brisk but polite. "Law offices of McCarthy and Dean. How can I help you?" "Hi," I said. "My name's Nolan Parker. I received notice about the estate of Richard Parker. I just wanted to confirm I'm on the attendance list for the meeting next month." "Let me check," she said, typing. "Ah, yes. You're listed as a beneficiary." That word, beneficiary, made my pulse quicken slightly. "Could you tell me in what capacity?" I can't disclose details until the meeting, she replied. But I can tell you this. Mr. Parker specifically mentioned you in his will. That stopped me cold. He did. Yes, sir, she said, her voice softening slightly. Quite directly, in fact. I think you'll find it interesting. We hung up, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. My grandfather had mentioned me by name. That man barely talked about feelings, let alone family drama. So for him to single me out in something as serious as a will, that meant something. I couldn't stop wondering what he'd said. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing something odd. My parents were trying to warm back up to me. It started with a text from Mom. Hope you're doing okay. We'd love to see you before the meeting. Maybe dinner? Then Dad sent one too. Let's put all this behind us, son. Family's family. It was almost funny. Months of silence, no apologies, and now suddenly they were sentimental. Claire noticed it right away. They're worried, she said one night, sipping her tea across from me. They know something about that will. Maybe they're not as secure as they think. She was probably right. My parents were many things, selfish, manipulative, controlling, but never stupid. If they were reaching out, it wasn't out of love. It was out of fear. So I played along. I texted back, sure. Dinner sounds good. We met at their house the following Sunday. I hadn't been there in months, and walking through the front door felt weird, like stepping into a museum of my old self. Everything looked the same. The framed family photos, the smell of my mom's cooking, but it didn't feel the same. I wasn't that boy anymore. Mom hugged me like she always did, too long, too tight, the kind of hug that tried to erase history. It's so good to see you, she said. Dad patted my shoulder. You look good, son. Work's treating you well. Better than ever, I said with a polite smile. Aaron came down the stairs a few minutes later, wearing that same smug smirk that always made me grit my teeth. Look who decided to show his face, she said. Nice to see you too, Aaron, I replied evenly. Dinner was awkward. They tiptoed around anything meaningful, filling the silence with small talk. The trip to Europe wasn't mentioned once. Neither was the money. But I could see it in their eyes, the nervous energy of people who knew they were sitting on a secret. After dessert, Dad leaned back in his chair, clearing his throat. So, Nolan, about your grandfather's estate. We don't know the details yet, of course, but we just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. No surprises. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of surprises? Mom smiled tightly. Oh, you know how these things go. Grandpa had his ways. We just think it's important to stay united, no matter what. United. I almost laughed. Erin crossed her arms. He probably left it all to charity anyway. He never liked any of us. Dad shot her a look. Don't say that. I watched them quietly, letting the tension hang. Then I said, you don't have to worry about me. Whatever happens, I'll handle it just fine. And I meant it. Because I wasn't walking into that meeting as their son anymore. I was walking in as a man who knew exactly who he was, what he was owed, and what he was capable of. A week before the meeting, I got a call from Sandra again. Mr. Parker, I just wanted to confirm your attendance for next Wednesday. I'll be there, I said. There's also a private note from your grandfather that's to be read only by you after the main meeting. It's part of his instructions. That made me pause. A private note? Yes. Sealed envelope. He left very specific directions. When I hung up, I felt a strange mix of curiosity and anticipation. My grandfather wasn't the sentimental type. If he'd left a note, it wasn't to say, I love you. It was for a reason. Maybe a warning. Maybe an opportunity. Claire noticed I was distracted that night. You keep tapping your fingers, she said softly. I smiled faintly. Just thinking. About the will. About what comes after. She tilted her head. You already have a plan, don't you? Not yet, I said. But I will. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I found myself replaying old conversations with my grandfather, small, seemingly random things he'd said over the years. Once, when I was 16, he'd told me, you've got your father's patience and your mother's heart. That's a dangerous combination if you're not careful. The world will take and take until you learn to say no. I never forgot that. When morning came, I put on a suit. Not flashy, simple, well-fitted, confident. Claire squeezed my hand before I left. Remember, she said, you're not walking in there to fight. You're walking in there to be seen. The law office was on the top floor of an old brick building downtown. The receptionist led me to a conference room with glass walls and a long mahogany table. My parents were already there, sitting side by side, whispering. Erin sat across from them. Scrolling through her phone like this was just another inconvenience. When they saw me, the room went quiet. Mom smiled first. "You made it." I nodded. "Wouldn't miss it." The lawyer, Mr. Dean, walked in moments later, a tall man with graying hair and the kind of voice that commanded attention. He greeted us politely, then got straight to business. "As you know, Richard Parker left behind several assets, including property, savings, and business investments. He was meticulous in outlining how he wanted these distributed." He opened a folder, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. "To my son, Harold Parker." That was my dad. "I leave the family property on Willow Creek, along with the remaining balance of my retirement fund." Dad nodded, trying to look stoic. "To my daughter-in-law, Margaret Parker, I leave the art collection and jewelry in storage." Mom exhaled in visible relief. "And to my granddaughter, Erin Parker." Mr. Dean paused. "I leave the Mercedes-Benz in my garage and my personal library, which I hope she will one day learn to appreciate." Erin's jaw tightened. "That's it." Mr. Dean continued without looking up. "And finally, to my grandson, Nolan Parker." The air in the room shifted. Everyone looked at me. "I leave the controlling interest in Parker Holdings LLC, including all associated assets, accounts, and deeds currently under its name." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Mom blinked. "What?" Mr. Dean looked up calmly. "That includes the land in North Haven, the apartment building in Boston, and the investment accounts totaling approximately." He checked a page. $3.6 million. My heart thudded. Dad's face went pale. That's not possible. Parker Holdings was just a small business account." Mr. Dean smiled faintly. "Not anymore. Your father expanded it significantly over the past decade, and he placed it all in Nolan's name as of his final amendment." I sat there, still my mind spinning. $3.6 million. I looked at my parents. Their faces were frozen, shock, disbelief, and something else underneath, fear. That was the moment I realized my grandfather hadn't just left me money. He'd left me power. And suddenly, the dinner invitations, the soft apologies, the sudden warmth, it all made perfect sense. They'd known. They'd been trying to get ahead of it. But it was too late. Because I wasn't the same Nolan they thought they could manipulate anymore. And as the meeting ended, Mr. Dean handed me the sealed envelope Sandra had mentioned. My grandfather's handwriting was on the front, for Nolan. "Only when you're ready." I slipped it into my jacket pocket without opening it. Because I already knew what it said, at least the spirit of it. He was telling me what he'd been trying to teach me all along. That some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be replaced. The weeks after the meeting felt like the calm before something big. Not the heady, chest-tight excitement of scheming, but the slow, meticulous calm of someone assembling a clockwork mechanism. I'd never been one for dramatic speeches or public scenes. My grandfather knew that about me. That's probably why he left me the keys to Parker Holdings. He wanted results, not noise. So that's what I set out to deliver. First, I hired people. Not the angry, headline-chasing types you see in movies, but quiet professionals who liked paperwork and neuron-frying detail. A corporate lawyer who smelled faintly of lemon and always carried 2 pens. A forensic accountant who treated ledgers like puzzles and smiled when she found things that didn't add up. An estate planner who could translate wills into locking mechanisms. I briefed them all in the same clipped way I briefed my team at work. Here's the objective. Here's what I have. Here's my tolerance for theatrics, 0. They nodded, took notes, and got to work. The first task was mundane but essential. Make sure the company was actually under my control. Forensic corporate housekeeping, I called it to myself. I filed resolutions, convened an emergency board meeting. I was the controlling interest. The bylaws were clear, replaced the old signatories on the company accounts, and changed the authorized users on every corporate card. Those changes took a few days and a stack of signatures. But once they cleared, every stream of money that had previously been an open tap to mom and dad, corporate reimbursements, petty cash, credit lines, was locked down behind passwords and approvals that only I controlled. People who've never had to put bricks down one at a time underestimate how satisfying paperwork can be. The bank calls were polite. The clerk at the title company hummed sympathetically when I told her to hold the transfer until further instructions. I set up alerts on every account so I would be notified, in real time, whenever money moved. It was tedious, surgical work, the exact kind of work my family always assumed I'd do without thinking. Now they'd see that my thinking had a plan. While the accountant dug through years of corporate expense reports and personal reimbursements, she unearthed things that made my jaw tighten and then go slack with relief. There were patterns, reimbursements that matched vacations, office supplies that lined up suspiciously with a boutique's charge history, transfers that had been routed in ways designed to obscure the beneficiary. Nothing dramatic enough to make police sirens wail immediately, but enough to create leverage. Enough to show a clear trail from the corporate coffers to personal weekend trips, fancy dinners, and, ironically, the same travel agent who had booked the Paris trip. In short, evidence of careless, if not deliberate, misappropriation. The Rome ATM withdrawal, once traced, was the cherry on top, a small, clumsy crime captured on camera that tied a face to a transaction. We had receipts that matched that week's hotel charges, and we had timestamps that didn't lie. I didn't rush to use any of it. That would have been the easy, sloppy revenge, the kind that feeds ego and leaves collateral damage. I wanted something that felt clean, proportional, and unforgettable. I wanted consequences that fit their behavior, not public shaming or ruin, but a restructuring of incentives so sharp it would force them to reckon with what they'd always taken for granted. Next, I reorganized Parker Holdings distributions. The company owned a few tangible things my parents had assumed were theirs to enjoy. The little cottage on Willow Creek Dad liked to bring guests to, the Mercedes that sat idle in our garage, and, of course, the account lines that had funded more than one emergency over the years. Using the corporate governance mechanisms my grandfather had set up and the legal counsel on retainer, I passed a resolution to move certain assets into a newly created family trust with strict terms. The trust's purpose, I wrote with a lawyer hovering over my shoulder to ensure the pros would hold up in court, was to preserve assets for the long-term well-being of beneficiaries who met specific conditions. Conditions like documented financial responsibility, completion of financial counseling, and a formal repayment schedule for any previously misappropriated funds. I watched the faces of the lawyer and accountant as I signed the trust documents. They were the same faces I saw at work when a risky project finally had the right risk mitigations in place. Serious, satisfied. Paperwork does something to a person. It makes intent concrete. Then I made my move, but I did it slowly and silently. Instead of storming into the living room with a stack of accusations, I started with email. A short, calm message to Mom and Dad. We should talk about the company's new structures. Can you meet me at the office on Thursday at 2? That sounded so innocuous I almost didn't send it. They answered quickly. The tone was wary but conciliatory. They wanted to appear reasonable. Fine. The office meeting was clinical. I explained, calmly and without theatrics, that I'd exercised my rights as controlling interest to update company policy, authorize a forensic audit, and create a trust for certain assets. I walked them through the trust criteria step by step, handing them printed copies so they could see every line. I presented the bank statements that clearly correlated corporate funds to personal expenses. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse them of being monsters. I laid out facts. Facts are difficult to deny. I could see Mom's eyes go glassy when she realized this wasn't a conversation she could talk her way out of. Dad tried to interrupt twice, voice rising, but I held up a hand and asked him to wait until I'd finished. When I finished, I did something small that felt enormous. I offered them a way to make it right that didn't hinge on public shaming or legal punishment. Repayment. A realistic schedule based on incomes and obligations. Enroll in financial counseling. Formal forgiveness in exchange for formal restitution. It was a businesslike, almost generous arrangement, an opening that left dignity intact if they chose to take it. That's the thing about consequences that are measured. They force the person who's been taking for granted to become accountable in a way that words never do. You can beg forgiveness into someone's ear all you want, but you can't beg your bank account to show mercy. Numbers don't care about your excuses. Erin's reaction was predictably venomous. She paced, fingers drumming on the table, insisting I was overreaching, that the Mercedes was a sentimental item Grandpa would have wanted her to have. "You're stealing from me," she said at one point, voice hysterical. "You don't get to decide what Grandpa meant." "I'm following the will," I replied. "And I'm following the law. If you want to contest anything, You're welcome to go through the legal channels. But you'll have to show cause. The quiet in the room after that was the sort that speaks louder than anything either of us could have shouted. I could have stopped there and let the trust do its work. That would have been enough for most people. But my grandfather didn't want half measures, and neither did I. He had left me not just funds, but the authority to fix a system in which generosity had become a liability. I wanted the lesson to be undeniable. So I set up two additional moves, ones that required a level of patience I didn't know I had. First, I changed the company's charitable giving and renamed the beneficiary to a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name, a small, local scholarship for hardworking young people from our town. I allocated a portion of the company's dividends to seed it and set the scholarship application bar high. Candidates had to demonstrate financial responsibility, community contribution, and a clear plan for their future. I arranged for Aunt Lisa, the only family member who'd treated me like an equal, to be on the selection committee. It was quiet, clean, and deeply aligned with the grandfather I remembered, practical generosity, not theatrical pity. Second, I invited them, everyone, to a family meeting at a community center, which I framed as a chance to announce the scholarship and talk about legacy. It sounded wholesome and bureaucratic. They accepted, thrilled that the family would again be united and happy. I booked the community room, arranged the refreshments, and printed a short program. In that program, tucked between the checklist and the thank yous, was a single line, a request that anyone who had benefited from Parker Holdings in the past 3 years disclose the nature and amount of that benefit in writing, as part of the foundation's transparency policy. It was the sort of bureaucratic request that sounds reasonable until you realize it's a formal mechanism that triggers accountability. When the day came, they arrived in smiles that were brittle and rehearsed. Mom clutched a bouquet she'd dragged from the house as if appearances could rewrite history. Erin had on the same posture she always put on when she wanted admiration. Dad shuffled through the room looking annoyed at the chairs, but proud in the way people are proud when they think things are still under their control. I stood at the front, introduced the scholarship, told a quiet story about my grandfather's workbench and the way he taught me to measure twice and cut once. I watched their faces as I spoke, Mom's eyes shifting, Dad's jaw tight, Erin's forced smile. Then, at the end, I asked for disclosures. The room hummed, the air thinned. Paper rustled. My mother's handwriting was already on the disclosure form she handed to the assistant at the table with a slightly trembling hand. Erin scoffed and scribbled something in a hurry. What they didn't expect, and what made my chest light with a peculiar, calm thrill, was that I had one more card to play. A quiet press of the button that would make their choices irreversible unless they took the path I had offered them. I had consulted with counsel and set a contingency clause in the trust that required no immediate public action, but automatically initiated a formal restitution plan if the disclosed amounts didn't align with the corporate records. It would be a legal mechanism, not revenge for the sake of spectacle, but a contract that converted their casual taking into enforceable debt unless they voluntarily made amends. I watched Erin's handwriting slow, then stop, then start again. Mom's face flushed. Dad's throat worked. There was a long moment where the only sound in the room was the air conditioner and the distant laughter of kids passing outside. That was the moment I wanted. The moment when their comfortable narrative, that I was the generous fool who would always take them back, finally slipped and exposed them to the practical consequence of their actions. Just as I was about to say something small, to puncture the silence with a single clarifying sentence that would make everything immediate and inescapable, the door opened. A woman from the bank I'd been working with stepped in, an issue in her hand, and her expression told me she'd found something new. She walked straight to the podium, handed me an envelope, and said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Parker. We found a reconciliation error in the international transfers related to last summer's travel bookings. It's complicated. You might want to see this." I slid the envelope open with my thumb, feeling the edges of the paper like the turning gears of a machine I'd built. Inside was a printout, a timeline of transactions, timestamps, and a file name that made my breath catch. The reconciliation pointed to a sequence of transfers that aligned with the Rome withdrawal and other charges. Transfers that suggested not only casual misuse, but a deliberate pattern of rerouting funds in ways designed to stay under the radar. It was what the accountant called a smoking trail. It was also what, in the hands of a careful operator, could be used to force full financial disclosure and, if necessary, criminal proceedings. I glanced up at my parents, at Aaron. They were pale. Mom's hands gripped the bouquet so hard the stems bent. Dad looked like a man who had realized a chessboard had been set up without his awareness. I hadn't planned for the bank to show up that day. That was the thing about the world. It sometimes does the final part for you, if you let it. The machinery I'd put in motion, the audit, the trust, the scholarship, the disclosures, had been steady and intentional, and now it had produced a lever that would make their choices have real, legal consequences. I could feel the room tilt, the air crackling with the question that hung in everyone's mind. What would I do next? I folded the printout, slid it back into the envelope, and smiled. It was the kind of smile that felt like the exhale after a held breath. Then I looked at them, at the family who had treated kindness as a resource to be mined, and I said, in a voice calm enough that no one could call it melodramatic, "We'll start with the disclosures. After that, we'll reconcile everything. You can choose to make things right, or you can choose otherwise." Aaron's face blazed, and Dad's lip trembled. Mom's eyes filled. Someone in the back cleared their throat. I left the rest of the sentence unsaid. I didn't have to. The envelope in my hand said everything the rest of my mouth could. The room held its breath with me. And then, just as the first person opened their mouth to speak, the building's fire alarm shrieked, cutting the moment into jagged pieces. People jumped. Chairs scraped. Someone shouted about the sprinkler system. The bouquet in Mom's hands soaked through in an instant. The interruption was absurd and perfect. It bought me a sliver of extra time, and I needed it, because what I planned to say next would change everything. The fire alarm did exactly what alarms do best. It turned the room into chaos and bought me the extra minute I hadn't known I needed. People stood, phones in hands, some laughing nervously, some cursing the inconvenience. Sprinklers hissed, water beaded on the program pages. Mom clutched her soaked bouquet like a prop in a play that had suddenly broken. Erin shoved her disclosure form into her purse as if it were poison. Dad looked like he'd swallowed a lemon whole. I walked to the receptionist's desk, took the envelope the bank rep had given me, and slipped it into my jacket. The sprinkler mist caught at my hair. The dress shoes of half the room left black fingerprints on the linoleum. Outside, someone joked that this was the most exciting family meeting ever. Nobody laughed. Not really. When the building manager announced, with all the authority of someone who does this for a living, that there was no fire and we could go back inside, the room slowly receded. The damp made the air feel sharp and honest. No one wanted to be the first to pick up the thread, but we were already tangled in it. I stood up. I let my voice fill the room. Not loud, just steady. "We were interrupted," I said. "We'll pick up where we left off." The undercurrent of whispers quieted. The community center chairs squeaked as people leaned forward. I felt like a conductor about to cue an orchestra I hadn't written the score for, but in which every musician already knew the first movement. Mr. Dean cleared his throat and asked if I wanted to present the reconciliation printout in front of everyone. I said yes, because while the envelope had been a private thrill, evidence in hand, this was never about a private victory. It was about holding the family to the same standard I had to hold myself to, enforcing transparency in a house built on secrecy. The printout was worse for them than I expected. It mapped, transaction by transaction, travel bookings, corporate reimbursements, ATM withdrawals, invoice descriptions that read like the script of a scam performed badly. The Rome withdrawal matched charges for the influencer hotel and a string of boutique purchases. The hotel's invoice matched a corporate refund request in the company books. The accountant, calm as always, explained the discrepancies in plain English. "We're not talking about clerical errors. We're talking about systematic routing of company funds to personal expenses that were never legitimately business-related." Her voice was gentle but precise. That's what makes truth difficult to wiggle around. Mom's face was the first to fall. She opened and closed her mouth a few times like she was trying to find air. Dad's hands trembled on the arms of his chair. Aaron's bravado cracked into something raw and animal, equal parts fear and fury. When it came time for the disclosures, the forms were thin paper, but they had weight. They weren't the dramatic confessions I'd imagined when I was angry. They were lists of numbers and dates, small betrayals inked down in a bureaucratic hand. Then something happened that surprised me. Aunt Lisa stood and walked to the front. She'd always been the only adult in the room who treated me like I mattered. She held the microphone without theatrics. "This scholarship," she said, "is a brilliant idea. It's what Grandpa would have wanted. But if we're going to do this properly, we have to start with truth." She looked at my parents with a level calm that was more devastating than shouting. "You can make this right, or you can let the law do it. The choice is yours." There was silence, brutal and long, the kind that keeps your bones raw. Finally, Dad's voice, small, not the angry baritone I knew, but something like a child's plea. "Nolan, we didn't know how to do any other way. We thought we were keeping the family afloat." He flailed for words that could make history evaporate. "You thought it was okay to take what wasn't yours," I said. "Not because you were hungry, but because the idea of comfort mattered more than the truth." I didn't shout. I didn't need to. Those who are used to ruling with money know the taste of it in the mouth. They know how it feels to be taken off the throne. That disorientation was written all over them. Mr. Dean put the legal option on the table. The bank had already flagged enough to support civil claims. The pattern could be used for criminal referral if prosecutors wanted to pursue fraud. I'd consulted counsel in the quiet of my life for months. I knew consequences could be enforced. The room watched me, as if expecting a final flourish. I had two paths, and I wanted my choice to be moral, not petty. I wanted the family to get a chance to repair the harm. So I proposed what my grandfather would have accepted: repayment plans proportionate to what was taken, mandatory financial counseling for my parents and Aaron, and a restitution schedule formalized through the trust. A plan enforced by a neutral trustee, and with teeth if the terms weren't met. If they refused, I'd let the accounts reconcile through legal channels and pursue the civil remedies. If criminal charges were recommended by investigators, I would not obstruct them. Erin's lips trembled. "You can't do this," she said. "You're destroying us." She sounded young and frightened, as if the world had finally tipped on its axis and she'd been standing on the wrong side. I looked at her without pity. "You made choices," I said. "You used other people's money instead of your own. You took money that wasn't given to you for your rent and spent it on designer dresses in a hotel. You were given chances and you chose luxury over honesty. It was harsh, but honest. You can't go to war with a person and then be surprised when you need to account for your actions." The room felt like the hinge of a door slowly swinging. Mom started to cry then. Wet, racking sobs that had no melodrama to them. Just the sound of a woman realizing the house she'd built on small conveniences had cracked. Dad's shoulders slumped. Aaron's face flushed the color of shame. In the days that followed, the fallout set in like a winter front. The bank's fraud team continued their investigation and ended up recommending civil action for the misappropriations. We filed a formal reconciliation claim to recover the amounts that had been taken. It was a process by which numbers got back where they belonged and records closed up like wounds. My parents were humbled in a way that looks ugly and necessary on the outside. They had to sell the Mercedes, the car my grandfathers had been so clear about, to help fund repayment. They signed on to financial management courses and started working with a counselor to untangle a lifetime of enabling patterns. Mom, who'd always used guilt like currency, learned to sit with discomfort instead of weaponizing it. The counselor made her write, with a steady hand, the list of times she'd chosen Aaron over fairness. She read that list to me one evening in a voice that wasn't theatrical, and apologizing finally looked like real work. Aaron was forced into the most uncomfortable place: accountability. The bank's report, the camera footage, the receipts, they cut off easy lies. She faced the possibility of criminal referral for the ATM withdrawal. In the end, prosecutors offered a deal: restitution and probation rather than prison time, conditional on full cooperation and entry into a financial rehabilitation program. She took it, partly because she was scared, partly because the alternative would have been a public legal battle she didn't want. She had to sell some of her things, go back to a job that paid less but was honest, and report regularly to a trustee about her progress. The Mercedes went to an auction and the funds were applied toward restitution. I watched her move through the motions with an adult seriousness that I hadn't seen before, and while a part of me wanted to gloat, a larger part wanted to see if she could learn. The neighborhood noticed. People I hadn't spoken to in years called to say they'd heard and were sorry, or, in some cases, were suddenly very interested in where the scholarship would direct its money. Gossip is a blunt instrument, and it cuts both ways. Some neighbors were defensive for my parents. Others slipped into the polite, curious distance that community gossip breeds. But the scholarship took on a life of its own. The first applicants arrived with essays and transcripts and letters of reference, and Aunt Lisa and I spent long evenings reading them. The first recipient was a kid from our town who worked nights at a hardware store and wanted to study civil engineering. He cried when he got the call. I cried too, but quietly and with a different feeling than I'd felt in months. This time my chest filled with something warm and clean. Money, as my grandfather knew, can be a tool for restoration, not just a lever of control. I used the company in ways that tightened oversight and redirected privilege to utility. We set clearer rules for company funds, instituted quarterly audits, and created a family financial policy that had legal punch behind it. No personal expenses without board sign-off, mandatory disclosure for any perceived conflicts, and zero tolerance for routing corporate funds for private indulgence. Those aren't small measures to people used to sliding invoices into their pockets. To me, they were the reasonable guardrails my grandfather would have insisted on. Emotionally, the house was quieter. The easy, performative love that had always wrapped around my family, where family will handle it, evaporated into a new vocabulary: repair, restitution, responsibility. It was messy. There were dinners where speech stuck in throats and apologies came out in stilted fits. There were moments of real connection. Aunt Lisa and I cooking a Sunday meal. Erin calling me late one night to say she'd finished her first budget plan without panicking. That last one felt like a small victory, the sort that doesn't merit a headline but changes the course of a life. People often ask if revenge feels sweet. My answer has always been complicated. There is a satisfaction in the righting of wrongs, yes, in seeing accountability finally applied where it had been asked for and ignored. But the sweetness is short-lived if it's only about triumph. What felt deeper, steady and strange, and almost sacred, was watching my grandfather's intentions unfold. He'd left me not just money, but a responsibility. He'd trusted me, in some small, fierce way, to fix a pattern that had been eating our family from the inside out. I took that responsibility seriously. I wanted the outcome to be fair, to be durable, and to teach rather than humiliate. Months later, at a small ceremony to announce the scholarship's first group of names, Mom stood beside me. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "We owe him everything," she said, and for a heartbeat the old easy lies almost resurfaced. Then she looked at me and continued, "But we also owe you an apology that fits the harm. We're working on it." I wanted to tell her that apologies are deeds, not words. She knew that now. Erin, after the months of restitution payments and the mandatory counseling, showed up at one of the scholarship selection meetings. She volunteered to help with the community outreach. It was clumsy at first. She fumbled with the sign-up sheets and apologized too much, but she came back the next week and the next. People noticed small, consistent changes. They add up. Dad, who had been so quick to insist I apologize, called me one night when the house was empty. His voice had lost its old sonorous confidence. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I was scared to take responsibility because I didn't want to seem small in front of my peers. I put pride in front of truth. That was wrong." The admission landed like a stone that finally found the bottom of a pond. We spoke for a long time about shame and fear and the distance those two emotions build between people. He didn't ask for things to go back to the way they were. He didn't try to buy forgiveness. He just said the sentence that had been missing for decades. Life, for me, reconstituted itself into a better version of what I'd had before. I continued to lead at work, but not as someone escaping personal chaos. I led as someone who had rebuilt order. I still invested in the company that was now my responsibility, but I also invested in my home, in my relationships that were honest rather than performative, and in quiet mornings when I could make coffee without feeling obligated to anyone. There were hard days, a tax question here, a legal form there. There were social ripples. People I'd thought would be allies were distant. Others I hadn't expected stepped forward. But the worst of it, the feeling of being that invisible glue, was gone. I didn't have to hold everything together for people who'd repeatedly sat back and assumed I would. On a warm evening in late October, Aunt Lisa and I walked by the river where, years before, my grandfather had let me sit in his workshop and taught me how to fix radios. We talked about the scholarship recipients and about how sometimes people have to be shown the consequences of their choices before they learn anything. She squeezed my hand and said, "He would have been proud. Not proud in the way your mother is proud when she brags at parties, but proud in the way men like him were proud," quietly, with a nod. I laughed. "That's the highest compliment," I said. As we turned back toward our cars, I thought about glue. For the longest time, I had thought glue was noble, that holding things together, even when they were falling apart, was the best thing to do. But real repair isn't about making things stick back together so they look whole. It's about replacing rotten wood, reinforcing the frame, and making sure the house stands on its own. You don't fix a broken floor by gluing the boards back on if the joists are rotten. You rebuild. That night, I sat down at my desk, opened the small, sealed envelope my grandfather had left me, and read it for the first time. He'd written, in his blunt, careful hand, that generosity without boundaries is a kindness that kills, that money can be a tool of freedom if wielded with responsibility, and a single sentence that made me smile and feel the kind of completion that isn't about vengeance, but about understanding. Fix what's broken, Nolan, but don't let fixing be your life. Build something that lasts. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer next to the photographs of the trips I'd finally taken for myself. I thought of the scholarship kid with grease on his hands and certainty in his eyes, of Aunt Lisa's steady faith, of Aaron's slow, reluctant return to honesty. I thought of the house I'd bought, the plants I remembered to water, and Claire, who sat beside me some nights and read while I tinkered with business plans. Outside, somewhere in the neighborhood, someone laughed, small, human, not forced. I poured myself a glass of wine, stood at the window for a moment, and felt that strange, clean calm that comes after a storm when the air actually does smell different. I had been the glue for a long time. Now, I was the architect. The house wasn't perfect. The family wasn't whole. But the structure was honest. And for the first time in my life, when I thought about holding things together, I didn't picture glue. I pictured hands that knew when to build and when to walk away. I turned off the lamp and went to bed. And as the city settled into its quiet hum, I slept without the old ache of filling other people's holes. I slept with the knowledge that I'd done right, not for vengeance, but because someone had trusted me to.